The question is, was it possible at the tail end of the war, or right after the end of the war in May 1945, was it possible for Hitler to have been deposited by a U-boat, either number 530 or 977, at some Antarctic base, as is told in various types of Nazi mythos? Now, Szabo in 1947 apparently invented the story that U-boat 530 and U-boat 977 shepherded a convoy that took Hitler, Mrs. Hitler, Martin Bormann, etc., to a German Antarctic base established in the so-called Dronning Maud Land in northern Antarctica. A German vessel, the Schwabenland, had visited that region months before the outbreak of World War II. Now, Szabo, in his treatise, Hitler est vivant, Paris 1947, the acronym is SFELT, Szabo rationalized that this was the primary reason the U-boats took so long to reach Mar del Plata in Argentina, where historically both ships were surrendered. Now, the early expedition, there was a German Antarctic expedition in 1938-39. In fact, one of the less well-known Antarctic expeditions is that the Germans, using this vessel Schwabenland between December 17, 1938 and April 12, 1939, some months before the outbreak of the war, were there. And yes, this expedition visited the western part of what is now known as Dronning Maud Land in northern Antarctica. Now, Nazi lore claims that there were underwater bases established, some type of pole fortress was established at the South Pole. Here we see a depiction of a U-boat entering some type of tunnel. You will see on the internet depictions of UFO crafts, German crafts, and U-boats in the Southern Ocean. Here is historically a picture of the U-boat 530, one of the ships supposedly transporting Hitler and crew to South America, or to the South Pole. And here is U-977. Now, interrogation reports indicate that U-530 was a Type 9C vessel which could reach 19 knots surface and 7.3 underwater. It had a range of 22,150 kilometers at 10 knots, 100 kilometers submerged at 7.3 knots, and a depth range of 230 meters. The captain was Lieutenant Otto Wemuth. According to reports, the ship's papers were destroyed. The U-530 sailed from Norway on March 3, 1945, and spent 10 days at Oslo Fjord, then headed to the open sea on March 13th. The U-530 was operating off New York City, Manhattan Island, between May 4th and 7th. When Wemuth learned that Germany capitulated on May 8th, he decided to head to Argentina, which he thought was friendly to Germans, and arrived on July 10th. Interrogators found no evidence to suggest that U-530 had deposited any treasure, passengers in Antarctica, or anywhere else en route to Mar del Plata. It was also decided that the vessel was not part of a large convoy involved in any type of secret mission. Wemuth testified that the vessel crossed the equator on June 17th, sailing submerged at first, then 7.5 knots at night on the surface, and at 2 knots submerged during the day as far as 20 degrees south. They then surfaced and increased speed to 9 knots because faster speeds would have consumed their storage fuel, reserve fuel. With these reported figures, it would have taken 57 days to cover the 8,500 kilometers between New York City and 20 degrees south. The final 3,300 kilometers would take 8 days for a total tour of 65 days, voyage of 65 days, which is correct because it actually was reported to be 61 days. U-Boat 977 was a Type 7C U-boat capable of 17.7 knots surfaced and 7.6 knots underwater. It had a range of 14,500 kilometers at 10 knots and of 125 kilometers submerged at 4 knots. They were depth rated at 250 meters. The U-97 captain was a Schaefer. U-Boat 977 sailed from Kristiansand on May 2, 1945, and with cessation of hostilities on May 8th, Schaefer decided, like Wemuth, to head for Argentina rather than risk capture. 16 of his men opted to go ashore near Bergen, Norway on May 10th. On May 11th, the vessel dived to avoid the United Kingdom, using snorkel to secure air. There was now a crew of 32 men aboard. 66 days later, safely past British base at Gibraltar, they surfaced. The vessel had little fuel. There had been allotted 80 tons in Oslo, and they had to travel slowly. From North Africa, they traveled south with one of 2 diesel engines while surfaced at night. During the day, they ran on electric motors while submerged. They crossed the equator on July 23rd and reached Mar del Plata on August 17th. The ship's papers were intact. U-Boat 977 took 25 days to cross 4,200 kilometers of ocean between the equator July 23rd and Mar del Plata on August 17th. This required an average speed of 4.7 knots, which seems reasonable based on circumstances. Crew lists for both vessels were provided by the Argentine Navy. The only unusual thing about the U-530 was that it was carrying more cigarettes than usual. This was never explained. Consideration of dates, times, and speeds suggests that neither U-boat had time to visit Antarctica and deposit anyone such as Hitler or anyone else. However, we must keep in mind sailors can lie and ship logs certainly can be forged. The question is, was a visit to the South Pole physically possible under conditions prevailing at the time? June, July, and August are midwinter months in the southern hemisphere. Could a sub reach Dronning Maud Land, surface, and unload onto the ice shelf in midwinter? The first obstacle would be the Southern Ocean itself. The second obstacle would be the ice pack 1 to 2 meters thick surrounding the pole during the winter. NASA and Indian satellite data show that Dronning Maud Land has pack ice extending 500 kilometers out from the coast in late May and June, and 1,665 kilometers out in July, August, and September. Now, to reach the coast and return to Argentina, U-530 would have to travel 1,000 kilometers under ice, and U-977 3,300 kilometers under the ice. Is it possible? Well, during the war, U-boats did hide under sea ice after attacking Russian ships on the Russian coast. They also attacked ships from under the ice in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In both cases, they did not go far under the ice. The main problem would be access to fresh air. Without separate air-producing capacity, diesel subs are not useful for under-ice operations. U-977, the 977, the snorkel, would be useless under the ice. These ships had no carbon dioxide scrubbers and would have to break through the ice at least every 2 days. Taking air stops under consideration, the average speed would be 3 to 5 knots under the ice. Now, could U-boats surface through 1 to 2 meters of pack ice? Damage could easily occur because of their low freeboard. For example, during 1947-48, the USS Senate was damaged severely while part of Operation High Jump, and this was during the southern summer. It had to be helped to the ocean water with an icebreaker. U-boats were typically not ice-strengthened. Navigation would be nearly impossible, too, due to the clouds at that time of year. Even seeing the coast would be impossible because, you see, there's a 10 to 30 meter high ice cliff near the ice shelf edge. If U-977 had reached the coast, the average temperature is about 26 below Celsius, and the wind speed is 28 kilometers per hour. Icy seas, too, would be strewn with icebergs. Wind chills would be 40 below Celsius on average, and there may very well be blizzards. For example, during the southern winters of 1950 and 1951, the Maudheim base staff stayed indoors the entire months of June, July, August, and September. Now, any U-boat crew landing would have to trek 250 kilometers across ice with hidden crevices, totally in the dark, to some type of lair in the mountains. Keep in mind, 24-hour darkness would prevail. So anyway, I hope you liked this short narrative. There was never any Nazi base in at the South Pole, and nor was Hitler or anyone else deposited there by these U-boats. And I will be uploading additional information on the so-called Hitler's Antarctic base, myths and actual reality. And I refer you to Colin Summerhayes at the Scott Polar Research Institute, which is at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and also Peter Beeching, his colleague, who is in Toronto, Canada. And they published their work in Polar Record, Volume 43, Issue 224, pages 1 to 21, 2007. This is printed in the United Kingdom, and it makes for most interesting reading. Thank you for listening.